I joined Pax Christi USA, I believe it was probably in the late 90s. I was a graduate student at the University of Florida in Gainesville, go Gators. Um, and at the time, there was a young man that worked there that worked at I was really active with the Catholic Student Center at the time. And there was a young man that worked um, just down from the Catholic Center, who happens to be the executive director now, Johnny Zakovich. And Johnny knew that had interest in things along the lines of the environment and environmental science and environmental justice. And I believe he invited me to a retreat. I guess it was a youth retreat because he also worked with a lot of young students with a lot of these issues as well. And so I got invited to a retreat down with the Florida Pax Christi group. And then I learned a lot from the retreat. I think Walter Sullivan, I believe, was giving the talk and talked a lot about the connections between care for creation. That was probably the first initiation with the group. I also went to a number of events with the Young People's Caucus, I guess that's what it was at the time. So we had retreats throughout different parts of the country. We also participated in the Jubilee Justice Conference in 1999 that I was a part of, and a little bit of that went on through in Quintro. So that was sort of my introduction into Pax Christi USA. So subsequently, after 2000, I had heard about a anti-racism initiative that the organization was looking at, and it was starting. I came in sort of at the tail end of when they had formed the first team, which again, I learned was the Pax Christi Anti-Racism Team, or PCART team. But in 2004, I applied to join the team. I guess it was their first recruitment. So I was in the first recruitment class in 2004, and I stayed on there probably for the next 10 or 11 years with the anti-racism thing. And again, I learned so much. I think one of the things that I've learned from this organization is how all of these issues intersect, and how this intersection I think a lot of times we think of each one of these issues as a vacuum and sort of exists in a vacuum. And I think we've realized over the years that they don't exist in a vacuum. And throughout all of them, you see the anti-racist or the racism that plays out within all of these particular issues. And so it was important to sort of learn how these systems and structures come about and how they continue to perpetuate these false senses of superiority and inferiority, which we see within the evils of racism. One of the things that I do respect Pax Christi USA, well, first of all, the fact that it's a Catholic faith-based organization, is that we are based Christian values and Christian faith, and how violent is the sin of racism, the violence involved in it, the oppression that happens and so forth. And I think if we go back and look at how a number of these systems came about and how they were formed, I think we can realize where racism plays a role. And I think this organization started to take a very, very deep look and a deep dive at what it is to to look at things through an anti-racist lens. I think there are a lot of organizations that want to be anti-racist, but, I think for some, it's mostly just window dressing. They want to see Black faces or faces of people of color here and there, but it's important to integrate people of color throughout the organization, not only within the membership, but within your staff, within your regional leaders, within your leadership, within your council. And I see that, certainly I think that there has been a concerted effort to do that on several different levels within the organization. Having said that, I believe that one of the things that I'm always extremely fascinated about is just how racism has played a role in looking at the different systems, and in our different pillars, our the four pillars that we talk about so much within our organization. It goes just beyond just looking at economic and racial injustice. There's also disarmament. There's also care of creation, which is definitely close to my heart, and looking at that. And then, of course, the gospel of nonviolence. And I think all of these different issues are all tied together. And I think Pax Christi has done a masterful job of really making those connections. These issues are not necessarily as separate as I think a lot of us would like to think that they are. I think our church as a whole is changing. The country as a whole is changing. It's changing. In the next few years, 50% or more of the population will be those of people of color, and I would hope that that would be reflected in not only just in our organization, but also in the leadership of the entire Catholic Church. Um, and not only just the church, but other organizations as well, especially organizations that that say that they're for peace and justice type issues, that um, talk about things like civil rights and so forth and so on, that they can, and then a number of these different peace and justice movements to sort of look at, maybe some things that were done differently, that could be done differently to make their movement a lot more multicultural, multiracial, and yet very inclusive and not exclusive.